So good morning. I'm Sophie Houet. I'm the global editor-in-chief at AFP, the international news agency. As many news organizations, we are facing the challenge of covering climate change, its impact, and the actions to protect life on Earth. Because life on Earth is clearly what is at stake. And this is no longer a matter of opinion. The facts are getting more and more brutal. It is now everyday news with terrible disasters everywhere around the planet. And for decades, the climate and environment issue has been a side story in our newsrooms. Promoting a strong coverage on the topic could be viewed as activism. And climate change is now a major global issue affecting everyone, everywhere. It is a permanent breaking news story and the most defining story of our time. So as journalists, it is essential that we raise this coverage to the top level. More and more news media are now getting reorganized to better cover the issue. Obviously, there are plenty of different models for different media. I will share with you some key elements of our journey to improve climate change coverage. Before that, let's dive into some context with this video about climate change in the Arab world. So we've seen the terrible impact of climate change in Iraq. It's in the southern marshland, reputed home of the biblical Garden of Eden and the UNESCO World Heritage, now becoming a desert. We've also seen reasons of hope with this huge solar energy plant in Morocco and also a program involving children in Qatar to help save endangered turtles. Earlier this year, the latest IPCC report about the solutions to avoid a climate catastrophe was an alarming reminder that the clock is ticking. Less than 3 years to halt the rise of carbon emissions. For the media community, it is another reminder that we have to raise awareness, to explain what transition means, and to hold decision makers accountable. Studies show that the Middle East and Northern Africa could be the first region in the world to run out of water, a trend which is accelerated by climate change and consistent drying. At the same time, the sea level rise is driving seawater inland into coastal aquifers and wells, putting at risk agriculture and waterfront cities. The region is also set to experience rising temperatures. A recent study shows that the Middle East is heating at nearly twice the global average. Without immediate changes, the region is projected to heat up by 5 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, possibly exceeding critical thresholds for human adaptability in some countries. Rising temperatures and decreasing water resources will accelerate the rate of desertification. Already dry soil is set to become drier, and desert dust will increasingly accumulate in the atmosphere and create more sandstorms. The impact on inhabitants is going to worsen inequalities. It will create more food insecurity, which will reinforce instability and trigger new migrations. And briefly, it is important to add some context with a global perspective. Here, we can see the fossil fuel emissions per continent, with Asia, North America, and Europe who are leading. Here is the same graphic with emissions per capita. Middle East has topped Europe. The Middle East is now not only stands to suffer seriously from climate change, but it has also become a major contributor to it. A recent study shows that the oil-rich Middle East, home to the world's leading oil exporters who are expanding the global carbon footprint, is also on course to becoming one of the world's leading sources of greenhouse gas emission, overtaking the European Union within several years. It will be critical to see over the next years if the pledges of our net zero emissions will be met in this region along with the rest of the world, with efforts to move toward renewable energy. It is a decisive story to cover because it also is deeply linked to changes in politics, in economics, and in the civil society. Not to mention that the COP27 will take place in Egypt in November, and that the COP28 is due in Dubai next year. So let's have now a first overview of how newsrooms are shaping their organization to cover climate change. I will refer you to a very comprehensive study published by Wolfgang Blau, mentioned here, who is a co-founder of the Oxford Climate Journalism Network. According to his study, there are three typical newsroom organizations to cover climate. The first one is expanding the existing science and environment team. The second is setting up a separate climate desk in addition to an existing science team. And the third one is about spreading the coverage in a virtual climate newsroom. In that case, there's no dedicated team, but a coordination between all the editors involved. So the latest solution doesn't require more staff or more budget, but it requires more coordination. So at EFP, we've been building an hybrid model. 4 years ago, the top editorial management made clear that the climate coverage is a crucial priority for every journalist, photo and video reporters included. So we are describing this priority as the future of the planet, meaning that we want to embrace all the sectors involved. We now have an hybrid organization with a hub of 20 climate and economics specialists who are covering energy, transport, agriculture, along with the climate science and biodiversity specialists. They are providing the expertise in the newsroom. This hub, which was launched a year ago because of COVID-related delays, is quickly improving the conversation between the journalists covering the fossil fuel emitters and the climate reporters. The hub also includes one fact-checker, one photo and one video coordinator. We also rely on our global network of 1,700 journalists who are providing on-the-ground reporting on breaking news and special reports. In addition to that, we have published internally strong editorial guidelines about the basics of climate change and the attribution of extreme weather events to help the newsroom to be accurate, to choose the right words and the correct background. This coverage is driven by visual journalism. In the daily news, it is obviously made of extreme weather events, disasters linked to climate change, but it also includes reports and studies, policy announcements. We are also putting a lot of resources in planned events, such as the COP27, with, for example, a package of prepared multimedia stories, including relevant stock shots in photo and videos. And this is starting this week for the COP27. And we will send a team of 20 reporters in Sharm el-Sheikh for the COP. Our coverage is also rich of special multimedia reports, often in remote locations. Among the latest, I can mention the twilight of the Tigris, a report to come in the COP package about the Nile threatened by waste, warming, and the mega dam, and another one about solar energy in Gaza. This visual coverage has been awarded recently, a year ago with great photos of the wildfires in the US by Josh Edelson, and this year with a collective video in several coastal cities threatened by the rise of sea level. Training our reporters is one of the most important challenges. This effort to improve science literacy and climate expertise in the newsroom must be supported by the top management. As other news organizations, we are providing in-house training with modules created by our climate reporters on facts and figures about climate change and also on greenwashing. We are also joining the Oxford Climate Journalism Network, a new program at the Reuters Institute to help journalists and editors to develop their climate change coverage. And we are working with the Climate Fresk, which is an NGO present in 40 countries, providing on-site interactive workshops on the cause and impacts of climate change. So, what worries media managers is the audience for climate change stories, because they are participating to eco-anxiety and sometimes leading to news avoidance. But it also is our duty to inform the civil society the best we can. And there's also an appeal for these stories, a growing level of interest from the audience and from our media clients. For example, I noticed 24 hours after the latest IPCC report was published, still was AFP's second most popular story in English and the third most popular in French. One day after it was published, and despite a big breaking news agenda, our great video on the Tigris River, published recently, was among the most downloaded video on our platform. So younger audiences are very focused on the topic because this is about their future. Climate change will define our children's entire life. It is important to tell them the truth with facts, figures, quality journalism. But it's also important to think about the formats to catch their attention. To do so, we can provide action-oriented content, constructive stories about what is being done at an individual level, but more important at a collective level to reduce carbon emissions. Explainers, great visuals, photo, videos, graphics are also very useful to attract this audience. We have recently launched new formats to attract younger audiences on social media platforms with vertical photos, videos and text easy to read on smartphones. Here are the extract of two examples. So one of the twilight of the Tigris And the other one about this cute beluga in the Hudson Bay in Canada. So these are only short extracts of longer stories. The public is also expecting accountability from the media who are explaining what should be done to fight the impacts of climate change. It means that we have to establish standards in our companies to measure and reduce our carbon footprint. In our buildings, in our traveling policies, in our data centers. At EFP, we are at the beginning of the process, but this is essential for our credibility. I will also talk about cooperation. I'm sorry, I just missed. I just wanted to tell you about cooperation. So cooperation between news organizations can also be very helpful to share experiences, to find some expertise and useful resources. And we were among the first partners of the Covering Climate Now initiative, now gathering hundreds of news media from all over the world. They are providing regular webinars on climate change, and they have launched an award on climate coverage 2 years ago. So this was the slide about environment responsibility. So as a conclusion, I will just add that climate change is affecting every area of our organization. This is systemic. This is not just about producing more dedicated content, more climate journalism. This is a total change of paradigm. And as news organization managers, this is our responsibility to shift our newsroom culture if we want to address the most important story humankind is facing. Thank you for your attention.